Hi, thanks for tuning in. I'm Dr. Larry Malerba, and welcome to episode number 2 of Rethinking Science, the podcast that challenges conventional views regarding science and medicine and defends citizens' rights to dissent and to make informed choices for themselves. Today's topic is going to be about certainty and its relationship to science. But before I start, let me give you a quick recap of episode number 1. We talked about how science is a method of inquiry and discovery. Scientific methodology produces the various bodies of knowledge associated with the different scientific disciplines. But science is not the knowledge itself. Scientific knowledge is always subject to revision, and history has proven that over and over again, which is why science is not a word that we use as a substitute for truth or settled facts. Although that doesn't stop a whole lot of people from doing just that. I'm sorry to say that the invocation of the word science during an argument does not make one's claims any more factual or correct. Science is a means by which to study the natural world. It is not a statement of certainty, and this brings me to today's topic. The general public seems to have mistakenly assimilated the idea that whatever science says has to be correct and true because it's science, and science knows best because it's factual and truthful. Note the circular logic here. Science is factually correct because science is about facts. Clearly, the public has adopted this caricature of science from somewhere, and it's my belief that it comes largely from the overly confident proclamations and assertions of some scientists and technocrats who are more than willing to bask in the authoritative facade that it imparts to them. When politics and the media amplify those assertions 1,000-fold, it's not hard to see why the average person would think that science is the modern-day arbiter of truth. Let's take a closer look at the role that certainty actually plays in the production of scientific knowledge. I'll use atomic theory as an example. According to the old model, Niels Bohr postulated that electrons travel in fixed orbits around the nucleus of an atom. This was understood to be state-of-the-art science, that is, until Werner Heisenberg introduced his uncertainty principle, which states that it is impossible to determine the trajectory of an electron. This means that it is not possible to locate an electron at a specific point in space at a given moment in time. The notion that an electron has a predictable trajectory was then discarded in favor of a new model that could, at best, calculate only the probability of finding an electron in a general region of space. The history of science is riddled with similar examples of scientific ideas once believed to be true that are now viewed as naive or outdated. Critical transition periods that change the perspective of the scientific world are commonly referred to as scientific revolutions. An understanding of the universe from the perspective of Newtonian mechanics was one such revolution, and the paradigm shift from Newtonian theory to quantum theory was another. Of course, smaller changes that do not alter the perspective of the scientific community as a whole take place all the time. Some historians of science say that those smaller changes gradually accumulate until they reach crisis proportions, at which point they can no longer be ignored. At such moments, the scientific community is forced to reckon with the cognitive dissonance between the old paradigm and the various anomalies pointing the way to a new paradigm. Now let's examine this example in light of the belief that science is characterized by certainty. For starters, the word revolution should make it rather obvious. A revolution involves not just a small or gradual change, but a radical and oftentimes sudden change from one way of thinking to another. It's almost the antithesis of certainty. Furthermore, our example involves theories, Newtonian theory and quantum theory. A theory is, by definition, only provisional or speculative. Regardless of how much evidence there is to support a theory, it is understood that all theories are open to revision because it is expected that they may be amended. A theory is certainly not certain. Get my little pun there? And lastly, Heisenberg's uncertainty principle says it right there in the name. It highlights the uncertainty of being able to locate an electron in space. In fact, it acknowledges that certainty is not possible, and the best that can be achieved must be stated in terms of probabilities. Probability is the mathematical/scientific version of gambling. Its language involves odds, chances, and likelihoods, all of which, again, are almost the opposite of certainty. So this idea that culture has assimilated, the idea that science is all about certainty, that the very purpose of science is to provide a sense of security in its ability to tell us what is right and wrong, true and false, real and unreal, is completely bogus. Science has virtually nothing to do with certainty. Certainty is an imaginary quality conveniently attributed to science by those who serve to gain from it. In the final analysis, the certainty of science is a modern-day collective myth. It is a myth manufactured by scientific authorities with the willing but misguided consent of the lay public. Now let me stop right here for a moment to remind you that I am not anti-science. I embrace science as a practical tool, but I also criticize science because I know that it can be better. I know that a better understanding of science will make it less likely to be misused. Remember, science is an open-minded method of inquiry. It is not a weapon to be employed against new ideas or opposing views. A great example of this is the self-styled skeptics who dedicate their lives to debunking and eradicating all forms of alternative and holistic medicine. Of course, skeptics do this believing that they are champions of science. They run around like the science police, demanding proof for ideas and claims that they deem unworthy of the label science. In reality, they are scientific fundamentalists who have no tolerance for heretical ideas that violate their delusional notion of what they think science is. The problem with skeptics is that their understanding of science is seriously flawed. I'll have much more to say about skeptics and their unique brand of scientific extremism, aka scientism, in future episodes. Now, that's not to say that certainty is a bad thing. It's nice to be certain of oneself, but in the worlds of science and medicine, that's not terribly realistic. A true scientist always acknowledges that there's room for doubt. It's really more accurate to say that there is a broad spectrum of certainty and uncertainty across all of the sciences. Generally speaking, there is an informal understanding in the scientific world that there are hard sciences and soft sciences. Hard sciences fall mostly under the category of the natural sciences. They include sciences like chemistry, biology, and physics, whereas the soft sciences are typically considered social sciences, and they include disciplines like psychology, sociology, and anthropology. Now, you may ask, why would they make such a distinction? It turns out that within the world of science, there's a kind of pecking order, if you will, whereby the hard sciences have a tendency to sneer at and look down upon the soft sciences. They may not admit to this, but it's true. Why? Because it's believed that the soft sciences are not as scientific as the hard sciences. And why would that be? Because the subject matter studied by the soft sciences involves less certainty than most topics studied by the hard sciences. The unspoken belief within scientific communities is that this relationship to certainty is what makes the hard sciences superior. Here's a definition from Wikipedia, which, by the way, I would never recommend for use as an unbiased source of information. Quote, hard science and soft science are colloquial terms used to compare scientific fields on the basis of perceived methodological rigor, exactitude, and objectivity, unquote. Now, you can interpret that how you will, but rigor, exactitude, and objectivity is code for hard science is superior because its knowledge base is more certain. Hard science walks around with a chip on its shoulder because its practitioners labor under the delusion that its ability to be more certain somehow makes it more scientific. However, the notion that one science is more scientific than any other is nothing more than silly gamesmanship. The real problem is that certainty has almost nothing to do with science. In actuality, it's a misleading expectation that has been imposed upon science. It's a form of bias introduced into science by various misguided practitioners of science who fail to comprehend the true nature of science. If you think about it, it's perfectly reasonable to expect that the softer sciences would be less certain because they tend to investigate more complex phenomena. As a general rule, the subjects of investigation that constitute the harder and softer sciences form a spectrum that runs from the less to the more complex, from the relatively fixed to the changing and evolving, from inorganic matter to organic life, and from the unconscious to the fully conscious. The difficulty, complexity, and number of variables undoubtedly increases as we move along the spectrum from the study of rocks and minerals to single-cell organisms to trees and grasses to reptiles and amphibians to human health and behavior. And with increasing complexity comes increasing uncertainty. The funny thing is that practitioners of the soft sciences often fall for this phony division of the sciences. They allow themselves to be influenced in ways that, in my opinion, diminish the quality and credibility of their work. Why do I say this? Because they fail to appreciate that soft sciences are, by their very nature, imprecise and qualitative. In my own opinion, that doesn't stop those sciences from being absolutely fascinating. Unfortunately, the soft sciences seek the approval of the scientific world at large by trying to emulate the hard sciences. They do this by unnecessarily overemphasizing quantitative aspects of their work. They use mathematical models and statistics in order to give the appearance that their work is just as important as the hard sciences, as if their work wasn't important to begin with. But this just highlights another misconception about science, which is the idea that framing its results in terms of numbers and quantities somehow imparts certainty to science. It does not, but it most definitely does fool people and creates an illusion of certainty. The statement that 4 out of 5 dentists recommend Crest toothpaste is just a gimmick that sounds more science-y and believable to the average Joe on the street.
Oh.
Even most medical lab results are numbers that are measured against theoretical ranges of what is supposed to constitute normal. I can tell you from experience that a high percentage of patients have blood tests whose results fall outside the normal range, and yet those results often turn out to be of little practical significance. In other words, that theoretical range of normal is far from certain, and it's riddled with exceptions. Let's compare two extremes as another example. Physics, which is supposed to be the epitome of a hard science, and astrology, which isn't even considered a soft science. In fact, astrology has been roundly condemned by the scientific community as having zero credibility whatsoever. I find it rather strange that physics is thought of as a hard science given how wildly speculative it can be. After all, we have string theory, multiverses, quantum entanglement, and dark matter, to name just a few of the far-out theories formulated by physicists. Pretty weird that we would place physics at the apex of the hard science hierarchy, right? It's my belief that physics holds this place of honor primarily because it is the science most heavily laden with mathematics. In fact, the math involved in high school Physics 101 is so complex that it would stump most of us. And although much of physics is theoretical by definition, all that math gives it a false aura of concrete certainty, which in turn gives it a sheen of respectability in the eyes of most people. Now, astronomy is considered a hard science, and yet astrology is viewed with outright contempt. Why is that? After all, the only thing astrologers are guilty of is trying to discern if there are relationships between astronomical patterns and events and human behavior. We know for a fact that women's menstrual cycles can be affected by moon cycles, and we also know that women's moods and behaviors can be affected by their menstrual cycles. Isn't it reasonable to think, therefore, that astrology would be a fruitful field of inquiry that could produce useful insights? Apparently not, because at a certain point in history, astrology was banished in order that astronomy could ascend to its position in the hierarchy of hard sciences. The bottom line is that much of physics is theoretical and uncertain, just like astrology. And yet one is revered by science, yay! While the other is hypocritically vilified. Boo! My thesis, then, is that certainty is not a normal feature of science. To the contrary, it's an artificial impediment placed in the way of science. The problem is that many in the scientific community have assimilated this belief. They see science as a means by which to prove others wrong, or to reject certain ideas as false, undesirable, and even unscientific. This false view of science creates opportunities for science to be abused, as in when someone says, "Sorry, the science is settled. I don't have to listen to you anymore. In fact, you must listen to me because I know better." Why do I know better? Because my idea involves science and yours doesn't. Ridiculous, don't you think? Within the sciences, there's a broad spectrum of the certain and the uncertain, and that is how it should be. It's pure prejudice to disparage an idea or a field of inquiry simply because it is speculative, unproven, or uncertain. In fact, a truly inquisitive mind would always want to know more and would surely welcome the challenge to investigate the unknown. Science involves information, data, hypotheses, theories, probabilities, and facts, all of which entail varying degrees of uncertainty. The degree of uncertainty involved in a particular branch of science doesn't make it any more or less important or scientific than any other branch. They are simply different. Always remember, science is about learning and discovering. It's not about proving, disproving, or debunking. Okay, that's it for Science and Certainty. Thanks for listening. And be sure to subscribe, and that way you'll know when to tune in to the next episode of Rethinking Science.